welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us here today. We're pretty excited to be hosting this conversation between a group of artists who are based in North America and in Ireland, and they have been having an exchange over the past couple of years. And so they're here and they're going to introduce themselves and show a little bit of their art, and then we're going to hear about their various perspectives and hear about what kind of issues have been coming up between them as they've been working together over this past time. So the first thing we're going to do, I think, is go around for about a minute or so and introduce each artist, just a little bit about them. And then we will hear a little bit about the exchange itself. And then they'll get into kind of showing their art. And then we'll have a discussion, and there'll be a Q&A as well. So we're really hoping that people will be contributing and asking questions as you wish, whatever arises out of you. And they've been working a lot on some of the issues that have come up are things related to place and decolonialization, issues of roots and diaspora as well. And I'm sure that these are topics that will be very much of interest to the audience here today. So I'll just start with myself. I'm actually not an artist. I am someone I've actually taught at Celtic Junction a few classes, and I have studied a lot of art history. And so one of the classes that I taught was on Irish immigration and diaspora in art. And that is how I kind of became involved with this group, because Erick was in my class. And so he asked me, would I moderate this discussion between all of you today? And let me see, for my day job, I'm actually the content manager at CIE Tours. So kind of the relationship between Ireland and America is on my mind in that way all the time. And I also have done a lot of advocacy work on various issues related to the Irish diaspora and sort of the needs of Irish immigrants abroad, particularly vulnerable immigrants. So I think we'll just start to meet the artists now. And I think, Martina, we said we would start with you.
Hi, thanks so much, Noreen. That's lovely to be here. I'm really looking forward to being part of this conversation. So I'm Martina. I am in Ennis, in County Clare, in the west of Ireland. And I'm a mother, an artist, curator, birth activist, and currently PhD researcher with the Centre for Irish Studies at University of Galway. And that's how I come to know Erick and Emma. I met them during lockdown, actually, when they were doing their masters in Irish Studies. So I met them on Zoom initially. And then in 2021, I think it was, I met Erick and Ariel when they visited Ireland. And so have kept in touch with them as this has all grown, and delighted to be part of it and looking forward to hearing about everybody's work. So that's me.
Thank you. And then Emma, we could go on to you.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today, and everyone who's attending as well. I'm Emma McKeagney. I'm an artist, writer, researcher as well. Still very early on in my career, but yeah, I met Erick during our masters during the lockdown in 2021, 2022. And yeah, we've been chatting forward and back. We'll get into more of that later. And yeah, I'm based in Dublin in Ireland. I was based in Sligo, Galway before as well. So I've been kind of moving all over the place the last few years, and yeah, that's pretty much me.
Good, thank you. And then Abby.
Yeah, thanks, Noreen, and thanks for everyone for joining. It's really exciting to be here. So currently I'm a student at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I've been living here in Madison for, getting towards a year now. Lived in Minnesota for a while and grew up in Wisconsin. So I've been in the regional Midwest part of the United States. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, predominantly focused on 2D charcoal drawings and sculptural 3D class. And I got connected in this group through Erick. We met during the Irish Museum of Modern Art summer session and started conversations there that have continued.
Very good. And then Sinéad.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sinéad, and I'm based in Belfast in the north of Ireland. I'm an artist and I work predominantly with sound art and performance, so a bit of live kind of all the kind of weird stuff. I'm very involved in a lot of organisations based in Belfast. There's a very small but active art sector in the north of Ireland, particularly in Belfast. So I'm the current chair of Vault Artist Studios, which is a self-funded collective. So I might talk about that a bit later on. I've set up other organizations. I set up Second Collective with co-founder Kathy Scullion. Work for another organization called Household Belfast, which is involved in art in the public realm, but thinking of new ways of doing public art. And I also work for Creative Exchange, which is an artist studio group in Belfast. So yeah, I'm doing lots of things and enjoying art. I'm really glad to be here.
Great, thank you. And now Erick is our final artist.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for joining everyone, and to Celtic Junction for hosting this. See some friendly names in the list. Good to see you. And yeah, I'm Erick. I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Dakota and Anishinaabe territories. And I grew up in Wisconsin as well, northern Wisconsin, and then sort of made my way to Minneapolis and then New York. And now I'm back in Minneapolis, and I focus primarily with video art and photo art, and kind of got connected to Ireland a few years ago in an ancestral journey, going to County Mayo, because that's where my great-grandparents are from. And yeah, I've just connected with the various panelists along the way and continued to figure out ways to make art about the process. So glad to be here.
That's great, thank you. So the first thing I thought we would do is we're actually going to take a look at just a couple of images. I'm going to do a really, really quick slideshow to sort of just warm us up for talking about art. So I'm going to be taking a look at a few images of emigration, and I'll spend like less than a minute on each piece. I think I have 5 pieces, and so we will just take a quick look, and then we will get to see some of the art from the artists gathered here as well. So I'm going to share my screen. And let me do the slideshow. Okay, can we all see that? All right, great. So the first image that we're going to take a look at is actually one of the earliest images in painting that we have of emigration. And this is kind of this would be one of the more iconic images. It's actually in the National Gallery of Ireland, so a lot of people would be quite familiar with this work. And it's by Edwin Hayes, who was an artist who mainly painted dockside paintings. And this one I think is so interesting because his use of light is so distinctive, and it's very different than his usual pieces. It's taken at sunset. So, we could be thinking of the symbolism, the sun is setting on people's lives in Ireland, and the people look, I think, quite small and very passive as they are about to get on this big boat. And it feels like, kind of there are other forces dominating the lives of these people as they're about to be taken away. And emigration at the time, this was the 1850s, emigration was a huge force in Irish life at the time. It was, one of the big waves of post-famine immigration was still going on. So our second one, I think, really highlights the connections that people in Ireland kept with the immigrants. This is called Letter from America, and it's really quite an iconic scene as well. The Letter from America was a huge force in Irish society in the 1800s, and it continued really through the 20th century. People would send money back. It wasn't just keeping the news. They would be sending money back, and it would not only keep the family, fed and clothed and housed, it would also often be sending the money for the next person to come over. So this is a scene that would be, very evocative for people, because it was something that was, a very common occurrence, and there were millions of letters passing every year back to Ireland. It was so notable that even the postmaster, had commented on it. Sometime in the 1870s, there's a great quote from someone noting they couldn't believe the amount of mail that was coming. This third one is called Economic Pressure, and I think this one is fascinating. Sean Keating, of course, is one of Ireland's great artists of the 20th century. He did an awful lot of, kind of paintings of heroic figures, of the nation building. He was, really well known for his pictures of the Civil War, and he does these beautiful cinematic paintings. And this one I think is really interesting because, around the middle of the last century, there was a lot of disillusionment about Ireland's success, because it was not able to keep its people in the country. And so by calling it Economic Pressure, which is a sort of bland, kind of title, like, it bespeaks of sociology. And, and you can see kind of the shame of the people as they look away, as the mother says goodbye to her son. you just really sense, I think, that kind of disillusionment that Sean Keating himself was feeling in his, in this new nation, which wasn't quite able to meet the needs of its people yet. And again, we see kind of the interesting use of light with the sun being off in the distance, someone is going to a potentially brighter future. And then that little dead tree there, which I just think is so extraordinary, that's in a couple of his paintings, and it looks so quirky. And this one is Pub Lodgings by Bernard Canavan, who I think is like really one of the most important of the Irish painters in England in the 21st century, kind of late 20th, early 21st century. And he in a way, I think his paintings are like advocacy. He really writes, he paints of the kind of the sorrow of that community. A lot of people left in poverty. They were very marginalized. And I think he really captures the difficult lives of the Irish in England. So he would be a personal favorite of mine. But there's actually there's kind of a school of Irish London painters who would paint very much along similar themes. And then David Monahan was a really interesting photographer who, in the aftermath of the Celtic Tiger, when the 2008 bust happened, he started taking photos in about 2011. And he said that he wanted to memorialize what is being lost to his country. So he would get emigrants the night before they left the country. He would take their photo in iconic places around Dublin, and it would always have that suitcase somewhere in it. So, and he's done a lot with this project after he has gone around the world tracing the people who have left. So that's our little warm up now. And now we're going to hear from the artists themselves. So we'll see. Oh, actually, sorry, Eric, I think you were going to talk about the exchange itself.
Yeah, thanks. And if we could get Emma spotlighted as well, we're gonna both talk about notions. Emma, did you want to start about the background?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it goes. I guess 2021, wasn't it, when we started the masters? I think. Yeah. So I met Erick all online during the lockdown. We were studying a masters in Irish studies in history and literature in NUI Galway. I came from like a visual arts background. Erick also came from like more film, so we kind of connected very early on. Obviously I'm from Ireland, from Dublin, and Erick had recently like visited Ireland a few times and considered himself kind of Irish American. And we started having conversations about mostly about a lot of the stuff that was on our curriculum and what we were studying. But we kind of, we're talking more about the ways it was kind of opening up our own ideas of the Irish identity, primarily. Obviously for Erick it was the Irish American identity, but what I found interesting was just kind of that interchange between the Irish identity, the American identity, how much within the kind of like white American identity, kind of a lot, and Irish American people really have this very singular view of Ireland. And at the same time we were talking about, how that is very much rejected in Ireland, but I'm really interested in kind of how much America has also echoed back to Ireland and is very much part of my lived experience of being Irish, is that like a lot of it is very American and feels, but there's this kind of tension between rejecting the Irish American while still very, very much taking on a lot of American values and economics and stuff. So I'll talk more about that when I have my own minute, but I'll let Erick continue.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, as we were kind of having these conversations in classes and learning, we were kind of, learning some of the historical literature and just and other bits of history. I started learning about all the ways that Irish Americans were represented, and we even learned the term notions from an Irish perspective of like Irish Americans coming back and having like a superiority complex and all these ideas. And so it's just really interesting, where I was sort of like feeling like I was trying to get away from America to find some type of refuge in Ireland. I was learning, just the ways that sort of my people have been represented, and then also all the ways that Irish, like the stage Irishman character and all of that. And so that just really led to all these interesting conversations of what are the assumptions about each other, and then kind of getting underneath that and figuring out what, like, how do we want to be in relationship with each other. And then yeah, that led to, like, Martina was a PhD, or still is a PhD at the time, but there was a lot of interaction between the master's and PhD candidates. And so yeah, Martina really brought in a lot of helpful context and support and just input as well. And then, like Abby said in the intro, yeah, through NUIG, we learned about this Arts and Politics summer school through the Irish Museum of Modern Art, IMA. And so I was a participant in that and met Abby and Sinéad through that. And we realized that, or Abby and I realized we were sort of like neighbors in Minnesota, but probably would never have met if it wasn't for this Irish summer school. And then Sinead and I have been chatting about different collaborations. Maybe we'll talk about witches at some point tonight or today. Yeah, and then I met Noreen through Celtic Junction classes and just really loved the art conversation. And so that's kind of how we got here today.
That's great. Thank you, Eric, and Emma as well. So I think now we're going to just go in and we'll go around the room here, and we'll have like 2 to 3 minutes of each artist sharing their art and some of the inspiration behind it. So we'll do the same order again. So we'll start with Martina.
Okay, guys. I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully this works.
Yeah, looks good. Yep.
Okay, just get it. There we go. So thanks so much. Yeah, so this is going to be more like 5-6 minutes rather than 3. What I decided to do is just give a really broad sweep of some of the things that I've been doing over the years, just to try and give some context. So just to, you know, I was part of the 1980s emigration to Britain, lived in London. I studied painting in Wales. I returned to Ireland in the 90s and did an MPhil in women's studies in Trinity College. Went back to Britain for a time, and then returned to Ireland to County Clare in 2004. And then in 2005, I had an exhibition which was shown in Ennis here and in County Clare, and also actually on campus in Galway. And it was called Stitch Up, Think Woman. And it was really a series of portraits that I did of the women thinkers that I'd really been introduced to during my my master's in women's studies. And these were the thinkers that I was engaging with as I was rearing our daughter, who's there, little Theo, with her Barbies, and behind her portraits of bell hooks and Helena Sissou, and just out of the frame is Simone de Beauvoir. So I was just immersing myself in still carrying and reading and thinking with these women thinkers and feminist thinkers as I had become a mother as well. So, and it was actually during the exhibition, I was chatting with somebody and they told me about this group of young mothers in County Clare at the time called Clare Birth Choice. And they were campaigning for maternity services for the region because there aren't any in this area. And so I went along and I met them and I sort of was helping out in ways. And then at one point, they'd been campaigning for a long time and nothing was really happening, and they were frustrated, and they had amazing birth stories themselves. So I invited them to do a project around their birth story. So Keeping Mum was born, and we worked together on this for a couple of years. And they found we worked using different materials, and they explored creative ways to share elements of their birth story. And we created a portable room of one's own, which we took around to various conferences and around Ireland and actually to Canada as well. And you know, to raise awareness around their experiences, the lived experience of birth stories. And so my whole life has been about birth since then. So there is, you can see Nell McCafferty. Some people might know the journalist and feminist in the shot there. That was International Women's Day in Ennis here. And then that lady in the grey jacket is Jo Murphy-Lawless. And Jo's an eminent sociologist and knows absolutely everything about birth in Ireland and internationally. And Jo I knew from Trinity days doing my women's studies, and I'm working with her still after all these years. We're still working together. And that leads me on to a project that was sort of nearly 6 years of our lives working with Joe. And that's the Elephant Collective. And the Elephant Collective is a voluntary group of birth activists. And we are called the Elephant Collective because when an elephant gives birth, the herd surrounds her to protect her. So that was the name. So Joe contacted me, I think it was early 2014. And this was the beginning of the Elephant Collective. And the impetus was to try and it was the legislative campaign. We campaigned for legislation to be brought in that would mean that when a woman dies in the maternity services, there is automatically an inquest. So up until this time, if a woman died in the maternity services in Ireland, an inquest was at the discretion of the coroner's office. So we launched the campaign in November of 2015. The photograph on the left shows Joe in the middle there among 5 of the men who had lost their partners through maternal deaths. And the woman on the immediate left there is Clare Daly. Now, Clare Daly was a member of the Dáil at the time of the Parliament. She's now an MEP, a member of the European Parliament. And Clare drove the legislation really through the early stages as a private members bill through the Dáil. And we created a multimedia exhibition. I did the portraits of the 8 women. Okay, the 8 women died as a result of maternal deaths between 2007 and 2013 in Ireland. More than that died, but these 8 women, their families did secure inquests, and that was a very protracted and complex affair for the families to do so, and all of them were medical misadventure, which means mistakes were made. We have a quilt that is the centerpiece of the exhibition, this multimedia exhibition that evolved over the 5 years, and it's a knitted quilt by over 100 people, commemorating those 8 women and all women who died in the maternity services, maternal deaths in Ireland, those that we don't know about. So that was the beginning of it. And it's quite, so my role then over the 5 years, my role was primarily as curator and working with community groups and developing connections with community groups. So what we did was we developed this multimedia exhibition and we traveled around to raise awareness about the legislative campaign, to allow people to really think about the complexity of what, there's no inquest when a woman dies? That really was shocking and hard to grasp. So we toured the exhibition. Each time we toured it, we worked with different community groups. Limerick and Clare Women's Network were amazing. NUI Galway was brilliant. We exhibited there as well. And so, as I say, each time we worked with community groups, we offered people the opportunity to create works that became part of the exhibition. This was International Women's Day in Limerick, and we worked with a playwright, and they created a play around the stories of the women's lives. So this was in Tipperary, and in Tipperary we worked with the 3 secondary schools as well, and I visited the schools, worked with the teachers, the art teachers, and we had an exhibition which we included artworks from the young people. And then we always had we have a documentary. We always had Joe and other people speaking. Every venue was different, every event was different. Meanwhile, we were lobbying and building the political aspect. This is us in Cork at UCC, the launch of a book around this whole issue as well. That's kind of the core group of us. And so Joe, and it all began with Joe used to teach midwifery students in Dublin, in Trinity. And so it all emerged out of this work that she has been doing around for years with midwives. There's midwives in among that group, midwifery lecturers, artists. We're just an eclectic bunch, but we're still going because there's still work to be done. So pause right there. So in 2019, the legislation was finally passed. And so the Coroner's Amendment Act came into law in July 2019. So now when a woman dies in the maternity services, there has to be an inquest. And an inquest is so it means a public event. So people will find out about what happened to their loved one. So it was major, it took a good 5, nearly 6 years of our lives, very involved, you can imagine. So somewhere in about 2018, in my wisdom, I decided I was going to do a PhD. And this time I wanted to look at birthplace. And I wanted to think about how we've separated birth from place and what that might mean, and how to explore that from lots of directions. I'm looking at my notes to see if I have anything of interest to say about it, but I'm towards the end, hopefully, of this process. I still have a few months, hopefully just a few more months left to go. I'm writing up at the moment. And I'm based in the Centre for Irish Studies, and I'm the first visual artist doing a PhD. It's research-led, but with an art practice part to it. And I've had phenomenal support from everybody at the centre, particularly my wonderful supervisor, Dr. Nessa Cronin. I have to shout out for Nessa. She's got the patience of a saint, as my mother would say, because she's been phenomenal helping me through this process. So, and I've included the portrait of Donna Haraway here again, because funnily enough, after all these years, I'm back around to Donna Haraway and Staying with the Trouble in particular. And in it, she challenges us, we must change the story must change. And so the way I think about it is that what she's challenging us to do is to rethink our position in the world and to decenter the human and to try and create a more than human world. And I think that that's a huge challenge on so many levels. And so we did think differently about living in the world. And one word that I absolutely love, and it's through other, and this idea, and I'll leave the quote there for you to read from David Lloyd, this idea of through otherness and through other, a different relationship with space that we lived in Ireland. So we lived in a more codependent way with each other and also with our actual physical environment. So it was a kind of more than human way of living. Whether or not it was totally decentering the human, that's a really interesting question. But I do think that we lived in a less individualistic sort of way. We lived in a more communal way. And it's something I think is really interesting to contemplate and to really think about again. And I do like the end of that quote where he describes how through otherness was a different way of thinking spatially, and it was virtually invisible to colonial reason. So we are in a time of colonialism, we know this, and this affects everything, including our relationship to birthplace. So that aspect. So there's a lovely phrase, on the wisp, which I really love, or on the straw or on the sop. And it was a euphemistic description of a woman giving birth. So women birthed onto straw, and straw has become the material that's recurring throughout my research in terms of the creative part of my work. I'm using straw, I'm making paper pulp with straw, I'm making containers, like little containers like this wrapped around stones. And so there's this idea of the exchange of materials, and I'm embedding these things with seeds and growing things. So the idea, sapaireacht is the Irish word, which means the act of gathering wisps for nesting or bedding. And straw, as we know in Ireland, is used as a material for absolutely everything from roofs to furniture, everything. And it's very connected to our rituals as well. For example, around St. Bridget, stepping through St. Bridget's girdle, all made of straw. And straw in our rituals is very strongly connected with fertility and birth. So hence, I'm thinking about ways to flip the whole idea, and let's think about birthing place itself as part of this sort of reconnecting the idea of birth and place, because we've totally decoupled it, and that's what my research has led me to think anyway. So so I have had workshops where people have made wildflower seed cakes, and then I have the ethical decisions of, like, should I plant them? Where should I plant them? Can I plant them? So, and I've been taking them back to Clare, returning birth to Clare, because there aren't any birth services here. So it's a whole play on this idea that here in Clare, you have to travel out of the area to access services. For example, we had 108 maternity units in Ireland in 1973. Today we have 19. So a highly centralized system, highly centralized. So I'm not going to go into that history side, but these I'm making bowls embedded with wildflower seeds that can be planted. I gave my colleagues at Christmas in Irish Studies a bookmark each, and the bookmarks are made with straw, paper pulp, seaweed, and they're embedded with seeds. They can be planted or not. You have the choice, but you can be thinking about what does birthplace mean to me? What does birthplace mean? And so I also made a sort of a dress, a kind of a play on the idea of the christening gown embedded with handmade paper from straw. And I've been taking it out around to derelict houses and cottages, and that's out at Carrigaholt in West Clare, and filming them and photographing it with the idea that, you know, we carry the traces of place. We are placelings, we are place births us, just as we birth in place. And so I'm playing with this idea of the spectral trace of memory and within our bodies, and also that it's all part of this ongoing way of living, part of the through otherness. that I mentioned as well, that kind of co-creative and codependent way of living in a healthy way. And I've got a quote there from Anna Singh, the anthropologist: "Our ghosts are the traces of more than human histories through which ecologies are made of." And I think that this is a very timely reminder of the amount of change that is necessary, the way we've lived. I think we've learned we have to rethink how we've been living with the world. We don't live separate, we are part of it, we're embedded in it. And I've made birthplace plaques from, you've guessed it, straw, paper pulp embedded with seeds. And I've been taking the plaques around the county and putting them and filming them and photographing them at these empty, deserted homes and houses that probably where births did take place, because births did take place at home well into the 20th century. And the idea is to honor those that were born there, but also to honor the place itself. The place births us. So to honor the plaques, and the plaques embody place. And I think I should stop. And anything I've raised, I'm more than happy to be contacted and talk in more detail about anything I've raised today. And yeah, always happy to chat and be contacted. So thanks so much. And I hope I wasn't too long.
No, that was great, Martina. And just to note, Otto had made a comment about it being a beautiful example of art being a catalyst for social awareness and change. So I think that was really quite fascinating. Thank you for sharing. And so now we'll go on to Emma.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And just before I start, I wanted to just tell a funny story while we're talking about birthplace. Me and Martina realized recently enough that my granddad was there the day of her birth in County Laois, where I was also born. So and even though we've been speaking for nearly 2 years and have never met in person, we're arguably very decoupled from place in how we've met. We've kind of realized we're very embedded in place and very well connected, which is kind of a very Irish thing. When you live in Ireland, you end up being related to everyone. But so can you all see that okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so my name is Emma, as I've said. I'm an artist, researcher, and writer, and I'm just going to talk you through kind of 3 main stages in my practice. Those are the 3 titles I'm going with at the moment. I'm very varied in my approach to my creative practice. I've also just come out of about 3 years of working in the corporate world and kind of keeping my practice to the side. So I'm kind of returning to full-time practice again, which has been a real privilege and pleasure. So it's all very much in flux, but I'm going to try my best to put a bit of shape on it today. So going back to kind of when I was in college here in Dublin and Dunleary, this is the culmination of my work in college on the left, was a very much practice-based sculptural practice, where I, towards the end of my time in college, kind of latched on the new materialism kind of vibe, which is very much just the realization that matter is vibrant. I remember seeing a very funny tweet recently being like, it's mad that the social sciences have just been ruminating on the idea that matter is vibrant for the last 10 years, but it seems like an obvious call, but it's, it really helped me in my practice. People like Jane Bennett, her book Vibrant Matter, because it was, especially very early on in my time in college, I felt like I kind of had to always really go in with a conceptual idea and then start making work. Whereas when I decided to start letting the medium or the material that I chose to work with, when I decided to start let that take the lead, that's when my work really opened up, and I just wanted to become kind of like a catalyst for work, a catalyst for materials. So this whole work is all about the process of refining local clay. So I went to the beach in Shankill. There's all these glacial till clay cliffs there. So this whole process was just refining that and creating kind of sculptural and very like bespoke looking works that all kind of elevated the process of refining clay. And then this tank one was the clay being like redissolved in water, and it like grew all this algae and all this mad stuff. So that was kind of there. And then from there, I did a body of work in 2018 to 2019 all about this rock that I found, and I was really kind of like trying to be humorous about these objects that we kind of gravitate towards at the moment. Obviously in society, like technology is very much the objects that we're surrounding ourselves in, but at some stage in our evolution, rocks would have been the new edge technology, you know, like crafting a rock. So this particular rock that I found, I just love the shape of it. So I did all these ceramic copies of it in space, and I was kind of just trying to make the exhibition look like an Apple store and trying to present these rocks like these like glistening new objects for people to behold and be obsessed with, because I was obsessed with them myself. So kind of elevating the object and this idea, I guess, between the blurred lines of human and non-human, and that we have had the society where we put human on top of everything. But even if you look at the evolution of our hand as an example, that the tools that we crafted actually pushed back at us and crafted, altered the way our hand developed over, you know, hundreds of years. So I was really interested in that kind of object oriented notion that like objects, we make objects, but objects also make us back, if that makes any sense. So then moving on a little bit, when I was studying the master's, I started, my thesis was about the bungalow in the Irish landscape and the history of the bungalow and how it kind of made its way to Ireland. So this is a lot more kind of based in theory and research, and it was just so interesting to see this bungalow, which seems like a really simple structure that people think just kind of blight the Irish landscape, actually become like a site of contestation and a real display of how colonialism has really made its way to every kind of corner of the earth, and what that does and how that bumps up against people's idea of even their nationality or like what the landscape should look like. And yeah, I could go on about the bungalow for about 3 hours, so I won't keep going on about it, but it's contested so much in the landscape. People expect rural Ireland to look a certain way, and then it doesn't because of these bungalows or for other reasons.
If you could just tell people what a bungalow is, because I suspect.
Oh yeah, I have more images on my website, which I'll link again, but it's just a one-story house. But the interesting thing about a bungalow is it comes from the colonization of India by Britain, and it comes from the term bungalow, which would have been like a thatched wooden hut built by local people in the Bengal region in India. And when the colonists were there, they started building their own temporary dwellings, and they anglicized it to bungalow. So in Britain and in Ireland, you would have heard about it in, you know, all these adventurers, all their stories from being in India. And then slowly it started to become kind of this term that was, there's just so many amazing stages of the bungalow and how it kind of melded across the earth, but it ended up, you know, in the beachside first resorts of the UK, a lot of the time in Ulster in Ireland, and then went to California, had its own unique style over there, became very architecturally celebrated. And then by the time it kind of explodes in Ireland, it's in like the 70s and 80s when we are kind of rolling back on public housing policy. And there's this movement of people building their own bungalows in the Irish rural landscape. And it's been contested a lot, and it's been given out a lot about, but it's a really interesting site or like nexus of all these different arguments about Ireland, the national identity, about the history of land use in Ireland, about, it goes all the way back to the land wars in the 1880s prior to Irish independence. So it's just a fascinating way to kind of zoom in on this one object, which is kind of similar to my work prior to this, where it's like, we think that we build objects or we build houses or we build spaces, but really they kind of mold us back. And I really like love this idea about landscape and how we carve into the landscape and we, you know, change it and mold it, and then it kind of dictates how we're going to treat the earth then moving forward. And I love Mark Fisher's idea about hauntology, where we're constantly haunted by futures that didn't exist, or we have to live with pasts that we didn't have any control of. And that's why it seems so hard to like change the reality we're in. And I think it's so much about our built environment, how we carve into spaces and how we create place. And really having an active idea of how that's happening is how I'm looking at my work at the moment. So these maps here are from, so the top one is from like 1830s to 1840s. And it's a place it's in Dalkey, which is South Dublin, one of the like most expensive places to live in Ireland. And here you'll see it was called Dalkey Commons. So it would have been like a common land that people shared from, and there was access to the sea, and it was a very small kind of provincial place. And then after they built the pier, all these workers started squatting there and basically getting rights to the land. And then all these wealthy merchants came out and started buying up these cheap land grants or land deeds and building these big mansions. So this is between the 1890s and 1910s. In that short amount of time, the place just became enclosed. So it's a very small mini version of the land enclosures that happened all over Europe. But I'm just fascinated with it because I think when you look at how Irish culture is kind of sent outwards, it's very much about rurality and rural Ireland, and how rural Ireland and poverty is depicted. Whereas what I'm really interested in is like how we've tried to become wealthy, how the wealthy portion of society has started to dictate everything for everyone else. So this is my recent work at the moment. I've been looking at those maps and obsessing over them. But yeah, I'm really fascinated with like what we're living with today in Ireland, which is like huge economic pressures, the reality of like things happening like the crash not too long ago, and then dealing with the housing crisis all over again, and what the reality of that is. And a lot of that comes from our impact from America as somewhere that the powers that be tend to really cling to, and free market politics and all that, and economics. So yeah, I won't go on too much longer, but I have a lot of writing on my website because I can just talk and talk and talk. I'm better at writing, putting a shape on writing. But yeah, and the one last thing I want to talk about is like I'm trying to bring a bit of humor into this at the moment. So I've been writing a story based around all this enclosure happening in Dalkey, and it's called All of the Cats and Dogs of Killiney, and it's a murder mystery set in Killiney, and it's very funny, and I hope to bring that to people soon.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's such a rich exploration of your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we'll go on to Abby.
Great. Emma and Martina, it is so fun to get to hear more of your work. We've been in discussions, but some of the stuff I'm getting to hear just for the first time too. So this is really exciting and just wonderful to get to hear you talk about it. So I didn't mention this in my introduction, but so I am pretty new to being able to pursue art full-time. I'm really, really grateful for it. Before, I used to work in the environmental sciences. So I worked as an environmental scientist and hazmat responder. That's what I went to school for originally. That's what I pursued out of college. And I found that ethics around the large oil business was really taxing on my soul, and shifted to working in the nonprofit realm while co-pursuing my art until art has just continued to get bigger and have been able to have the opportunity to pursue it. So my practice right now really moves within the intersections of identity and experiences and place and environmental contamination, definitely informed from my education and my previous career. And it's really caused a lot of reflection on the systems that we're expected to participate in within our daily lives that require us to interact with contamination that we may not even be aware of, like within the food systems or even hygiene systems of the body products that we use or stuff like that. some work that I'm doing now, I won't share any pictures of it because it's still in progress. I'll show you some that has been recently finished. But another large thing that I've been thinking about, as a first generation descendant of the Fond du Lac Band of Ojibwe, I've been thinking a lot about treaty rights and the times when my family is able to exercise our treaty rights through hunting and gathering, thinking about what the compromised status of the food is that we might be interacting with. Some examples of this might be like chronic wasting disease. Here in the Midwest is a big issue for harvesting deer, or heavy metal contaminants in the fish or the plants to harvest, and just continued always constant concern around our water. And knowing that so many of these complicated situations have been caused by colonization. And that's just something I've been thinking a lot about and spending time with. And a lot of this stems from thinking about the removal of consent related to our bodies, and that continued theme within this space of interacting with contaminants that we might not, like I said, be aware of. So I'm gonna share my screen to show some work that I have been working on. So as I said before, I'm a 2D charcoal drawing is what I enjoy. I also really enjoy 3D sculptural glass, particularly related to mold making. So this is hot mold blown glass. And a piece like this is really considering the contaminants within the metal fillings that we get that off-gas mercury at all times. And as somebody who had gone on mercury responses, cleaning up mercury in different areas, this was something that was in conversation a lot with my coworkers and peers of the time, just considering the different realms that we interact with in these spaces of environmental contamination. Or for example, like I said, the food systems that we interact with on a daily basis. And this is one of the last sculptural pieces that I just finished up a couple weeks ago, actually, kind of once again considering the idea of contamination within food systems and within our water, and how we interact with that. And that's what I got.
Great, thank you so much. That's so thought-provoking. Amazing. Now, all right, we'll go on to Sinead now, please.
Hi. I'm going to talk a bit first as well, just a bit about my practice and the things that I'm interested in. So I kind of living in Belfast and being in Northern Ireland, I've lived most of my life here. You know, I've traveled and lived in England for a while, but mostly I've lived in the north of Ireland. And all of that obviously has an impact on how you make work. But this idea of, like, you know, colonization and still living within, like, for example, the north of Ireland where I live is sometimes referred to as the occupied six, because it's the 6 counties of Ireland that are under British rule. So there's all these things playing in, you know, when you're making art and thinking about art. A lot of the work that I make is quite feminist, and that's the kind of background to what I'm trying to say, I suppose, but it's not the only thing, really. I think when I think about my practice, I think about lots of different elements of research. It's very heavily research based, but it's not necessarily academic research. So it can be anything really from popular culture to social media, films that I watch. Like, I feel like I just pick up all these things, and sometimes when I try to talk about how or why I'm making work, it gets very confused because there's so many aspects to it. You know, I was thinking there when Martina was talking, I was thinking about the references that she was talking about, and I almost have so many that I forget them. So like Donna Haraway has played a big part in things that I think about, but also other writers, you know, like the Black feminist writers as well, and people like Bell Hooks is like really important to me. I've made a whole piece of work just on one novel by Bell Hooks, you know, so I feel like the things are quite diverse, but they all have these kind of common threads of giving a voice to the other and exploring ideas about justice and who has access to justice. and how that is informed by your gender, your class, your nationality, you know, all these things, your ethnic background, and all of these kind of fit in to what I'm trying to say. So I'm just going to share a screen with you, but I will be flipping between, I'm going to flip between a few different things. So this is kind of like the work that I do really is, it started off as installation. It was quite visually based installation. So I'll show you some examples in a bit of the kind of light that I was using. But as I went on to do my master's, I was still working in performance as well. And as I went on to do my master's, I became more interested in the idea of sound. So I would have had I didn't really think about them as separate things, and they sort of have merged into one kind of practice. There's like a performative bit, which would have been something similar to what's on the screen now, where I would just like sit there for a while and engage in a kind of activity. And then they became more about sound and light, and the sound became the predominant thing. So this piece of work is going back like as far as 2019. This is a piece of work that I made, and hopefully I'll play whenever I play it here, and I'll just let you hear it for a bit, and then I'll talk a bit about it.
These boys have this promising star football players. Promising future.
So this work was 20 minutes long, and that's my daughter speaking. She spoke, and I had that playing for 20 minutes, and it was edited like that over and over again. It was connected to so the high profile trials, rape trials that occurred in like across the world, like somewhere in the UK, somewhere in Ireland, somewhere in America. But the words that she was saying were words that had been said about the men involved in those trials. So you could hear her saying there, you know, star football players, and the focus was really on the behavior of the men as somehow, I don't know, like justified, or he wouldn't have done this because, you know, this is his, he's so great at swimming, why would he have done this? So that kind of got to me a bit, and I was like thinking about this, how we grow up with these kind of ideas of what's been said about men and what's been said about women. And that sort of just went on to inform different things that I was doing. So I started then just thinking about this idea of sound and using sound. So I would create these kind of light installations, and this kind of is one of the installations that I did for my graduate show. This is my MFA show, which took place kind of lockdown had happened, and the MFA was basically stopped, and then this show kind of happened after it. And it was kind of based off that, where it became less about even the words and just about female experience and what things are not said, and what things we don't talk about in relation to women. The lights were kind of, it was through a computer program, the lights would change over the course of the audio installation. I'm not going to play them because they're like, it's very hard to document sound and put it up. It's not even really on my website that much, but I do have like a Vimeo account, you know, where I have different things on there. Yeah, I just do find it sometimes a bit hard to reflect that in what I'm wanting to show, I suppose, about my work. I might play you a little bit of this one as well. It's quite intense, but I'll play a short bit of it and you can sort of get to hear. I'll maybe move it on. Yeah, so I think I just became interested in that, this idea of sound, basically, and how sound could be quite powerful. So then at a later point in time, just after I'd finished my degree, I actually got an award from Catalyst Arts in Belfast, and Kilkenny County Council gave me this award to basically look at witchcraft and kind of explore the ideas of why there weren't as many witch trials in Ireland, and kind of thinking about that idea of how pagan kind of culture influenced Ireland, and how people kind of accepted a bit more the idea about paganism. And it kind of got me on towards thinking about ritual ideas, and I suppose thinking about how, you know, this idea of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable as ritual, and thinking about church and all these kind of things. So yeah, I think that kind of influenced me in terms of what I decided to explore. So I was on the Emma course with Erick and Abby, and kind of started thinking about grief and different things like that. My father had passed away when I was doing my master's, and all of this started to inform the things that I was thinking about in my practice. And the kind of witchcraft thing has kind of come through in a big way, you know. So I think, like, I do think of these things, like I think sometimes about social media, for example, as a big factor, and I make pieces of work about that. But then I'm also thinking about, you know, pagan culture and witchcraft in Ireland, and thinking about grief and how that impacts on you, your connection to the land, and thinking about, you know, who you really are and what you identify as, and how does that impact how you view yourself, I suppose. Like, so this is how I kind of came to work with Erick. So Erick and I have done quite a bit of work on in a grief collective, and we've worked together kind of thinking about video and audio. And then Erick and I are also thinking about other aspects of that and how to bring that idea of working collaboratively, but also working in different mediums, and kind of how you could kind of incorporate those ideas about great witchcraft, really, but being connected to the land as well. So yeah, I think that's really it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sinead. Another fascinating collection of thoughts there. And now for our final artist, we're going to go to Erick.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, echoing what everyone else said, this is so amazing, and I haven't seen a lot of this either, so it's super cool. And stay tuned on the witchcraft project, because we're still just filming stuff, but it's exciting. Yeah, so I'll just breeze through my presentation. So I think over the last like 4 years, I've really been, it sort of initially started with an exploration of, I guess you could say, white male Americanness before my journey into looking into my roots and Ireland and what that all means. So I was really influenced by some of the books that Sinead had on there, like Caliban and the Witch, and just trying to learn how, like, why things are the way they are today with patriarchy and capitalism and all of that. And so that kind of led to really going into what might be my subconscious and like fears and stuff like that. And so this project White Vinegar developed, and so I made a short film that was, yeah, really thinking about how we interact or don't interact with spaces and places. So one spot was on a beach, and then the other was in a studio where we brought in some natural elements, but it was really removed from land. And then some friends and I also did some supplementary photo shoots and created different characters looking the spectrum of white maleness and looking at masculinity and gender. And so, this is a screen grab from the film. So just bringing in sort of some clear tropes of what you think about for America, but then putting it in a big white space. So, and this is from a photo shoot with that same character, John. And then this was like right about the time that I was getting into like looking more into Ireland and learning about Bridget and other goddesses. And so for whatever reason, that came in, and another character. And then in my moving on to more current time in my Irish studies program with Emma, was exposed to a lot of literature and really got into like Martina and The Year 1912, which is a story about a trunk. And the first two words of the story are the trunk. And that just was like a lightning rod for me because my family had trunks in our basement growing up, but we didn't ever talk about them. I didn't know whose they were. They just held blankets and collected dust. So I was like, so I wanted to share a little bit of inspiration that I found that I was really drawn to and resonated with the Irish literature, and just a note from an introduction of Martina O'Kine's short story book is in this milieu, many things are alive: the thorn bush, the filling tide, the wind through the telegraph wires. This Irish double view, a two light of the mind, is most readily seen in the images, some extended into epic similes, which are mini stories in themselves. And then just to go in a excerpt from the short story, The Year 1912. And so this revolved around a trunk, and the main characters were a mother and a daughter. The daughter was on the last night before emigrating. And so it was all going on in what was going on in their heads, but what they couldn't express to each other. So the trunk was taken from the room and set like a golden calf on the table. Take out, and the mother says, take out that and tie it up on the sidecar, said the mother. And the daughter says, it might get broken. Leave it alone until I'm ready to go out along with it. That trunk was her license and authority to wear an elegant hat on her head and an ostentatious coat on her back instead of a shawl. Without the trunk, her lady outfit would be an insult to God. If she let it out of her sight for as much as a second, as like as not, those tricksome and showy garments would wither into rags and ashes about her body. So I've just really been sitting and revisiting this story and thinking about what to do with it, and talking with Martina and others a lot about material culture. And so this is just a little concept art from a film project that a friend of mine illustrated, where it starts with a lost Yank washing up on the shores of Ireland with a trunk. So yeah, I'll stop there. And yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Oh, that was fascinating. So we have a few minutes for discussion. And I guess one of the questions we might ask is, kind of what are the themes that have emerged as you guys have been discussing things together? Like, what things seem most vital to you out of your interactions with each other? We'd like to discuss that.
I mean, I think one of the things that I've thought about when speaking to Eric is kind of connected to his work. But we've had definitely different conversations about the ideas of the Irish in America. And I suppose like one of the books that I'm reading, and I know Eric has read it as well, is How the Irish Became White, and kind of exploring the idea of the behavior of Irish people in America. And I was like, we'd had this kind of similar discussion about Bonnie Greer, who, was born, I think, and lived the majority of her life in Chicago, and talked about how the white people there were all Irish. So all the people that she ever knew and experienced in power were all white Irish people. And, I think for people, certainly from where I'm from in Belfast, I think people would be quite shocked to think that Irish people in America are racist. They we have this view that, oh yeah, like the Irish people are the downtrodden ones, and they're the victims and everything. And I think that was kind of interesting. It's certainly something that still kind of plays on my mind a bit. I'm like, oh.
That's interesting. Actually, this reminds me of Bernadette Devlin visited Boston, and in her book, I know she writes about her experience of kind of feeling alienated from some of the racial attitudes she experienced there. Yeah.
And definitely, and her, she obviously she was given the freedom of somewhere and awarded it to the Black Panthers and things like that. So there's all that kind of thing where you don't see yourself in that, like you don't, obviously people are different, and especially if they've been there for a long time, you know, the generations of people who class themselves as Irish but they're American, and I suppose there's it's just very complex, isn't it? It's more so than you think.
It's true. Does anyone have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well, the kind of one thing that we that came up a lot in different themes and different literature in the Irish Studies Masters was this notion of diaspora time. And I had a conversation recently with someone whose parents were Palestinian refugees, and they felt the same thing as well, that like when someone is kind of untethered from a place, that they get kind of stopped in the time of when they left a certain place. So I think notions of Ireland that are very American are actually quite ancient notions of what Ireland is, and it can be frustrating when you've like grown up in Ireland to just have obviously different concerns and different ideas, and wanting to kind of be able to develop the notion of what like being from Ireland is. And I think like what we always kind of come back to is this idea that like your nation state or nationalism is very much an imaginary concept that is, you know, that you kind of are born into and have very little say to interrogate that until you really try and interrogate it. So I also like love the way Erick has really, you know, tried to interrogate his notions of what being Irish American is, and it also through my learning, it's interrogated what, you know, what being Irish is, and a lot of it is very much made up and imagined. And I think it's really interesting when you think of like Northern Ireland as well, like there's this like blended state happening there since the peace process, where you can kind of choose your nationality, and that's something that is very radical really in current affairs, to have a blended state in a way. Obviously it's not fully blended, but in terms of being able to choose an Irish passport or a British passport, which is something you can talk about in a lot of different states of occupation, how to think about that, or a new way of thinking about place that isn't all steeped in nationalism and those really aggressive ways of looking at nationalism.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Martina, I was just thinking about that though, because I think there is something so different, you know, like I feel very Irish. I feel like I am an Irish person. However, I do see that there are differences, you know. I think like when you come to the north, there's different, we are influenced by English people and by, you know, the things, even though we feel different to England, for example, we do have that British influence even in the architecture and our expectations and things that we think are appropriate. Definitely would be a mix really of, I suppose, Irish and British cultures. Sorry, Martina, I didn't want to cut across you.
No, you're grand. No, I was just thinking, I was just picking up on what Emma had just said there about the different ways of thinking about place. That's become my obsession, is trying to find other ways of thinking about place, so that there's, and I keep coming back to the phrase not only, but also. So not only do we have all of the identity politics and the complexities of and the legacies of colonialism in every facet of our lives, but we also then need to be, for me, what's so exciting is all of the new materialism work and the thinkers, the post-human thinkers who are thinking outside of that to a large extent. They're trying to push beyond the boundaries of how we think about ourselves and the notions of humanism that we've inherited, whether it be, you know, in the scientific models that I would be looking at the history of in terms of obstetrics, or in any, you know, Enlightenment scientific knowledge, how it dominates, say, that aspect of life. But Enlightenment thinking and that form of humanism dominates so much of and is so tethered, for want of a better word, with colonialism. It's integral. And I love, for me, what's exciting is thinking with that, and then thinking otherwise as well, like concepts of through otherness, or, you know, with Indigenous scholarship as well. Even people like Robin Wall Kimmerer, I'm looking at her book, it's sitting here on my table. And so it's that kind of negotiating another way of thinking about ourselves as emplaced ecological beings. You know, it fascinates me. That's just where I'm at with things at the moment.
Yeah, I wonder, Abby, like if you've anything to like say there, but like one of the things that we were looking at in one of our modules was mapping, and there's that map of North America, which is the Indigenous map, and there's all these blended boundaries, and there's not really, it's not, you know, the straight lines that we see. It's all very these blended boundaries, and that there can be crossover, and there can be, you know, different attitudes towards where a boundary is, which I find so interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because like there's that map showing the different territories. It also makes me think of, and I'm so disappointed I'm going to blank on the artist's name, but there's an artist based in Minneapolis who's been doing mapping of the Twin Cities area, but is doing this really interesting merge of historic traditional Indigenous sites, they're Dakota, mixed with like contemporary locations, like the stadium that's in the Twin Cities, some of the like the large contemporary landmarks. And I think it's really interesting to see these different merges of kind of what mapping can look like in terms of the history that we're calling upon and the present day where we're at. And yeah, I think that's something that I've kind of been thinking about in terms of place, and then also in terms of like the liveness of the location where we're at. Martina, you mentioning Kimura's book is something that I think about a lot, and just the liveness of everything around us, and how sometimes what we don't get from mapping and from looking at stuff. Thank you, Eric. You sent me a wonderful message. It's Marlena Miles is the artist of the map. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's Marlena Miles. So I'd recommend looking at the maps that Marlena has. It's really neat.
That's great. Thank you.
Can I just jump in? There's a lovely story. I don't know if you know it. About from, I think it was in the late 19th century, there was a soil map made. Have you come across this? It was in New York, and it was one of those World Fairs events. And when they made a soil map, so they brought soil from Ireland, and from each county of Ireland, and they made a map with this, you know, and each county had the soil from that part of Ireland. And it was part of this World's Fair. And then there's this story of this woman, I think from Fermanagh, an elderly woman who probably left the famine, and she arrives in and she drops to her knees and, you know, on the soil, you know, the homeland. And of course, there's different ways of interpreting it. So that's treated as nostalgia, or, you know, she was a foolish old woman, you know, and all of this, and she was kind of made fun of. What if it was this connection to place, and that she knew that there was the soil had that resonance and love, you know, that connection. And maybe, you know, maybe there was something else going on there. But in the literature of the day, she's kind of dismissed as a stupid old woman. But I think it's really interesting. And also the fact that they went to the trouble of bringing the soil and what that was about. And there's so many layers to that. I really enjoy thinking about that. But I don't know if any of you have come across that before. I think it was something like 1897, quite late. But anyway, I just thought you might like that story.
I haven't come across that, but Martina, you saying that has been making me think of, I've been noticing this theme within my own work of having some sort of dirt or soil or sediment within it. And that's been something I've been trying to interrogate more, of like this interest that I have of incorporating it. And I think it comes from the sense of place, but then also a sense of what place can also not look like, if like how can we represent it, of like this sense of non-geographic mapping. I know that was a conversation that I had with an individual out of IMA, of saying like, well, how can we represent mapping without map? What does that look like? How can we make it look like? And I think that's something I've been kind of toying around with, of having something so foundational as dirt, and how we can bring that in.
Cool. I think there's an interesting question from Otto, which I think kind of plays on this a little bit. It seems a little related, where he says that in his Irish cottage course, he explores the romantic gaze many Americans, Irish descended or not, have of Ireland, and in particular the idea of living in an Irish cottage. And he notes that it generated interesting discussion from class participants, both from the States and from Ireland. So he asks if there's any thoughts around this.
Can I show something really quickly about this? So this is something that I loved looking at in my thesis on the bungalow, because this was the thing that really it came down to, was that people come to rural Ireland and they want to see an Irish thatched cottage, but when they're there, they see a bungalow. But a lot of what was being exported from Ireland was just the image of the thatched cottage. Like, that was huge. But this image I love sharing side by side, which is this is a Michael Scott building a house built in 1937 in Sandycove. And then this painting by Paul Henry is actually newer than the building. So at the same time, modernism was really taking hold across Europe and in Dublin, whereas rural Ireland was very much being exported as this image, this like perfect sacred image. But Paul Henry, has a huge part to play in that, really kind of sanitizing his images for this quaint idea. And the man who wrote Bungalow Bliss, the book of the pattern books, his son was like, the people who are giving out about bungalows never had to live in a cold, damp cottage. So, like, there's this huge divide around whether the cottage is like a real symbol of Ireland.
Amazing. And actually that building reminds me a little bit of Dublin Airport as well, which was so modern looking, and the way Ireland played that really important role in global air travel in the 1930s with Foynes and the flying boats and all of that. So yeah, it really is an interesting mix of the very traditional and the very modern. That's great. We have one other question as well from Hal, who asks for Erick to elaborate a little bit more on Bridget and other feminine deities influencing your work.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hal. It's an interesting question. I would say around that time I was really thinking about like the Enlightenment, and I think white vinegar was the point of departure, was like interrogating sort of the framework of living within the Enlightenment. And Martina and I have talked a fair bit about that, and that keeps coming up in stuff we're reading. And I think it was like, for me, it was a point of stepping back and trying to figure things out, or like think through an answer, or like and plan something out, but just go to a studio and like, well, like kind of a listening in different ways. I think at a certain point I heard for the first time someone say like, oh, I was listening to the wind, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I would just say, I mean, I think the simplest answer is trying to practice what intuition might be, but I think it's just like taking a step back and being open to that, and then Googling like Irish goddesses, and then seeing what pops up, and then be like, oh, Bridget, she's cool, like blacksmith, like, and so just going with it and not thinking. So I'll stop there, but I'll keep thinking about it. Thanks.
That's cool. That's cool. It looks like we're probably coming to the end of our time together. So maybe is there anyone who has any final words, anything that you don't want to go without something being said? And cool. And I think, Erick, do you have some information on next steps? It's going to be an audience survey.
Yeah, I will pull that up. And I will say too, from what Martina was sharing about the woman who like dropped to her knees upon arriving, I want to hear the whole story again, but like that was my experience of like when I got to Ireland for the first time. Like, I didn't know much about it. In the image of my head was like, oh, a cottage on the fields somewhere, whatever. But when I got to County Mayo, it was like, I don't know why, but I like had to like put my feet in the grass or something. It was like really strange, but with her. So, but yeah, so thanks everyone for attending. I think we're going to give Cormac a chance to pop in as well and give a little plug for Celtic Junction, our hosts. And yeah, thanks so much to Celtic Junction for allowing us to chat. If you want to say a word about Arts Week and then
I just want to thank all the artists as well. Thank you. This has just been the most fascinating discussion, and I really appreciate being part of it. So thank you. And to everyone who attended as well. Thank you.
For sure. I would echo that as well. I'd just like to make you all aware of a couple of other events. We're in the middle of a kind of a 2-week Irish Arts Week. It should be called Irish Arts Weeks, but I suppose that's a little awkward. We have a terrific event tomorrow night, which is put on by one of our very close partners and a group who cohabit Celtic Junction Arts Centre. The Centre for Irish Music have 2 of their finest young youth students are doing it's not their first concert, but it's a concert as a duo, and they're part of a program, a kind of post-secondary or post-high school program called the Taking Flight Collective. So we're presenting a concert with them tomorrow night. We have a work out of Ireland, which is called The Humours of Bowden. It's an Irish dance show, which is basically about the stories of this one lady growing up as an Irish dancer in Ireland. It's a one-woman play, and it lasts about an hour. So that's tomorrow evening at Celtic Junction Arts Centre. And then finally, the movie that I suppose certainly caught the imagination of the Oscars, maybe not to win, but to an Oscar nominated movie from Ireland on Colleen Hune. We're actually hosting our own showing of that live and in person on Sunday evening at Celtic Junction Arts Centre. So they're all available. Thank you all so much. I'm sorry I didn't come on to say hello at the beginning. I was dealing with some stuff in the background here, but it was a fascinating chat and a really, really wonderful work. I really applaud you all, and thank you so much for contributing to this whole series of webinars, and we hope to talk to you all soon. I know some of you have classes that you're participating in as well, so please stay in touch. There will be a survey that comes out at a later point. So if there's anyone else has anything else to say, please go ahead. I will sign off here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.